people had a corner grocery store. You had no refrigeration. So you would walk a block and you would buy chicken, for example. If you wanted chicken for supper, they had live chickens stacked in cages on the sidewalk beside the street. So there was a corner grocery store on just about every square block of the whole city of New Orleans. They were everywhere. And so you'd take your basket and you'd walk down to the grocery store. If it was this time of the year, you had cabbage. So you could buy a couple of fresh cabbage and go home and you'd have cabbage for supper with some sausage and, you know, maybe some ham or something that you bought at the store. So when you came home, supper was in that basket and you'd go home and cook whatever you're going to have that night. So along came a man by the name of Schwegman. What was his first name?
John.
Huh?
John.
John Schwegman. John Schwegman worked for his uncle. His uncle had a large grocery store in uptown New Orleans. I can remember the street usually of where Schwegman's uncle's grocery store was. But he went to work for his uncle. And John was not your ordinary grocery store employee. He had one great idea after another. Most of them didn't work, but he was creative as hell. Well, pretty soon, his grandpa, his uncle, just got enough of it. So he fired him. And John somehow decided to do the craziest thing anybody ever heard of. He decided to make a different kind of grocery store. When you describe my grandfather's grocery store, you're describing a man with a stick, and if you wanted a can of peas, he reached with the stick and he got the can and he put it on the counter and asked you what else you needed. You know, you needed a cabbage, you needed a pound of Swiss cheese, whatever you wanted. And he'd get it and he'd put that on the counter for you. He'd total it up, you'd carry it home, and he'd put the money in the cash register. That was how grocery shopping was in the 30s and into the 40s. It was that or nothing until John Schwegman came along. John Schwegman had an idea that nobody in the United States of America had had up to that point. The customers could go out and pick up their own groceries in a supersized grocery store environment. And because it was so convenient for them, and because you could market lots of different products and put up specials and do salesman kind of things for the food that the people ate, you let them wander until they could find what they wanted and put it in that same grocery basket and bring it up front, and you can check them out. But this was to be a superstore. This was to be a great big grocery. And where did he go to find a affordable building? Way out on Airline Highway. My Lord, halfway to Baton Rouge. Well, it really wasn't. It was just into Jefferson Parish. They didn't want him doing anything like that in Orleans Parish, but he went on the border of Jefferson Parish coming out of Orleans along Airline Highway, and he found a place that was vacant, and they let him rent it, and he went out to the different people who supplied groceries to his uncle's store, and sure enough, he started letting people go. And they had a regular wooden cart on wheels like you would see people use around a grocery store or hauling beer into my grandfather's store. They had, a cart on wheels and wooden, and you'd had the beer cases stacked on it. Well, all the customers had one of those. There was no such thing as a grocery basket like we see today that everybody's used to, made out of metal and all. You didn't have that. You just had that wooden cart, and it worked. It worked very, very well. And when it worked like that, oh my Lord, the people couldn't believe it. And Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, A&P, of course, tea was a multi-million-dollar business. Tea was terrifically expensive, unbelievable to us in today's world to hear what people paid for tea. And that's when you hear about the Boston Tea Party. Those people threw $5 million worth of tea in the water and made a big point with the Parliament in England. Oh, Lord, this was government-owned, the King's tea. They threw it overboard. Who are these people? Another story for another time. But the A&P, Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, thought maybe John Schwegman had something. So they came down and looked at what he was doing. And his prices were half of what you'd pay at the corner grocery store, because he was a volume operation. He was on TV when TV first came out. He was one of the first advertisers on TV, but he was on radio before that, inviting people to come out and pay half as much, and he'd quote the prices. Oh man, the corner grocery store people went nuts. How can he be on the radio? That ought to be illegal. Naming the prices that we pay for a pound of ham, he's selling it for less than we pay for it. What? How's he get away with that? He ought to be put in jail. John Schwegman was very controversial. But the Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company thought maybe they ought to open some stores like John Schwegman's stores and see how they do. Well, of course, the long story even longer, they did open a whole bunch of stores all over the East Coast and all over the United States eventually. And they were mimicking what John Schwegman was done. By that time, John Schwegman had not one, not two, not three, but 10 stores. And he was doing a land office business. The corner grocery store people got together and they formed the Louisiana Grocers Association. Who was Mr. Giese? Well, he was the man that the corner grocery store people hired to manage the humongous warehouse they built, bigger than anything Schwegman had. And they bought groceries much cheaper because they represented 200 corner grocery stores. And their volume, all added together, made anything John Schwegman could do look like Ned and the Primer. So they were big in the grocery business as an association. And they got better and better and better doing what they did. And the Associated Grocers, Louisiana Grocers Association, grew up and did very well. Well, that was New Orleans. You had a similar problem in every community. You had a similar problem in Baton Rouge. So there were a group of grocers in Baton Rouge that had a great idea. They were going to start one just like the Louisiana Grocers Association in New Orleans, but it was to be in Baton Rouge, and it was to be called Associated Grocers. So Hill and Moore moved to Baton Rouge to run Associated Grocers. Associated Grocers was all over the state of Louisiana. New Orleans couldn't see past the Orleans and Jefferson Parish limits. They thought like they owned everything there, and the rest of the state of Louisiana was out in the country. And you didn't have nothing to do with the country. Well, Hill learned better. he ran the country and got a lot bigger than the Louisiana Grocers Association. Mr. Hillamore. Hillamore, the district attorney, is number 3. Junior was the one who left Louisiana Grocers Association and started Associated Grocers with the help of all the corner grocery store people, trying to imitate what happened in New Orleans when Schwegmans started. Well, John Schwegman was at the guttural level because he started with nothing. And he had been fired by his uncle because his uncle just couldn't put up with it. He was one cuckoo idea after another.
His uncle had a Schwegmans too?
No, his uncle had a corner grocery store off Magazine Street, on Magazine Street. I don't know if it was called Schwegmans. I don't know what it was. Probably Gerald's or something. It must have been his name. But it was just a big corner grocery in the inner city. And I mean, the idea of going way to hell and going out on the airline highway on the other side of the overpass, over the canal. I mean, my God, what are you going to do out there? This kid is nuts. And he's turning the customers loose to go out and pick up their own groceries. Oh, my Lord. What are you going to do with that? I'm glad I fired him. I'll tell you what. He was going to run us out of business. Oh, God. And they had to have special made grocery baskets where they could hold a beer can. That's how you got the grocery stores that we know today.